So, yesterday I read let's see, what's it called again? Metaethics and Experimental Philosophy, A Journey Through Thick and Thin by Pascale Willemsen. And he was talking about metaethics, well, he was talking about metaethics. That's kind of, well, it was kind of linguistics more than metaethics, about these two concepts. Thick concepts and thin concepts. And he was claiming that they are different type of words, like different type of adjectives can have evaluative meanings or not. Alright, and if I recall, thick is where it has evaluative and thin is where it has no evaluative. Let's double check that though, so I remember correctly. He was thinking about stuff like, no, this is not no, this is it. Good and bad compared to, wait, where is the, here we go. Rude, cruel, friendly, compassionate are considered thick. Because he was saying that they have descriptive value and evaluative value. While the text claims that good and bad have evaluative value but not descriptive. And I kind of disagree, right? Because language happens in context. And good and bad can mean different thing in different contexts. It's just a more vague kind of thing, right? Cruelty is kind of rude. So cruelty is a more narrow descriptor, while rude can be a little broader in the descriptive sense. And we were talking about evaluative things, right? And I kind of went with my go-to, which is Hume's guillotine, is that if someone is cruel, the evaluative thing, right? If you think cruelty, you don't like cruelty, and you think cruelty is bad, that doesn't make the word bad, right? Some people might think that cruelty is something good, right? We agree what cruelty is with its descriptive value, but just statistically speaking, most people, when they think of cruel, they think about bad things. So I kind of disagree with this whole notion of how, let me move that, was in the way. This whole notion how good and bad, well, thick and thin were described. I would say that if you want no evaluative language, you would not use good and bad. You would not use this setting, right? I would say if you want a black and white distinction, I would say that the word green is a great example, because the word green has no, well, let's say round, no, or flat. No, you can have, right, in context, all of these things, you can have an opinion about them. Yeah, green or round. Yeah, those were the examples he used as well. But these are not thin, right? Thin, maybe that's the sense, right? Thin, they are thinner because they have less descriptive value. But then these would be the thickest, right? Because they have the most descriptive value. No, these are not thin or thick. They don't fit into the description of thick or thin at all. They don't fit in. So maybe it is a scale, right? Like I was thinking yesterday, right? A scale where how descriptive or how evaluative a word is, right? The word good is more, you can use that more evaluative than you can friendly, for example. Friendly is more descriptive and less evaluative. So maybe it is a scale after all. The text, my memory was that it was kind of black and white. And then he talked about, that's a philosophical semantics question, right? What does these words mean? and whatnot. But the argument of the text is that you can, right, use, it's about experimental philosophy, which is pretty much turning philosophy into science, right? Do statistical analysis, do research. And they did a lot of research, which that they found surprising. I didn't find the results of the research surprising at all, because, right, they asked questions similar to this. This was an example, right? Tom is cruel, but he is not bad. The study was in the case, right? They were trying to look if you can separate the evaluative properties and the descriptive properties, right? Can you separate the badness from cruelty? And then you get this sentence, right? Tom is cruel, but he is not bad. If that is non-contradictory, then you can separate them, right? That the word cruel, you don't have to have the evaluative bits in there. Which I argued, right? Of course you can, right? Some people find cruelty useful, right? Someone who is cruel find that useful and find it not bad, right? There's a lot of people that do torture to find information, and they don't think that cruelty is bad. They think it is useful and good. And so they evaluate it completely different. Therefore, in my mind, you don't need a statistical analysis. You only need one example, right? To say that, yeah, you can do this. You can separate them. But showing this to like a bunch of people, which is the statistical analysis that they were doing, right? They were asking a lot of people. Does this sound contradictory? And I argued that the way that this is written kind of implies, right, that you get the contradiction here. Right? You prime someone to say that this is contradictory by this. But he is not bad. And these are two separate statements, right? Tom is cruel, Tom is not bad. But they, right, the author of this text has married these two things together. And like has primed them, like primed the reader to see them to be connected. And of course, a lot of people connect cruelty with badness. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that the whole experiment doesn't really work for me at that kind of base level. Then they talk about other stuff, right? They do tests, ask some more questions, right? You can investigate, right, different concepts, right? This is a big problem for me because that's reduces reliability of the tests because it's implicit here, right? But you can try many different ways. Like something they found was that when people used bad stuff that is typically bad, like cruelty and rudeness, that was more often found to be contradictory than positive, like friendly. And that made sense to me from a psychological standpoint, but that type of study has not been made before, and that's where we kind of ended up, that there is value in that contradiction thing in these studies to learn what people think, right? That's what that was my conclusion, yeah. That these studies that they're making, they are not experimental philosophy. They are psychology, group psychology, or sociology, right? What does this group think? It's not a study in metaethics. You cannot make any statements about metaethics, right? You can use the knowledge you can, right? But the study is not in metaethics. It is not even, I'm not even sure that I would call it experimental philosophy. Yeah, I would call it sociology or group psychology, something like that, right? You're looking at a group and what a group thinks. Because we can imagine a group of people that think cruelty is better than another group of people, right? Just think about the Nazis, just burning Jews alive. That's super cruel, and they thought it was a good idea. A lot of people thought that was a good idea, right? And that was cruel. But they still thought it was a good idea to be cruel. Different groups of people have different ideas. That doesn't say anything about the word itself. It just says something about the opinions. Again, Hume's guillotine, right? You cannot derive an ought from an is. Cruel is an is statement about the world. And then you have, well, I like cruelty or I dislike cruelty, which is an opinion. I think there ought to be less cruelty in the world. Those are totally separate things. One is about you, the speaker. The other thing is about a statement about the world. You cannot get from one to the other. Then they argued about action guidingness of the thick concepts, right? The cruelty. Calling something cruel. If you say to someone, that was very cruel, then you kind of want them to change their behavior, right? That's kind of what they were looking at. Right. And that's sure trying to manipulate someone else by calling them rude or cruel. But my point in this, I said again, right? Context matters too much, right? Sometimes when we speak to each other, we use language where we try to influence each other to change each other's behavior, right? That's not inherent in the word, that's inherent in the context. My example was like, if I say, oh man, that was super rude, and I laugh about the thing, then I'm not trying to change your behavior, it's just commentary, right? And laughing and having fun about it. So yeah, I think context matters way too much, and Hume's guillotine is too sharp for this. Alright, but this website, philosophyofbrains.com, they have like a thing here. So he wrote his essay about the thing, and then someone else's responds to the essay. So that's the plan now, to see what this response looks like, by Bianca Cepolaro. Sorry about that. I can't pronounce that. Alright. Commentary. Testing the loaded side of language. Right, exactly. So Bianca starts with, I share Pascale's enthusiasm for new insights that an empirical approach to the philosophical study of language can offer, especially in the domain of what we may call loaded language. That is, speech that does not only describe the world, but evaluates it. Right? And I kind of reject this premise still. It seems like that this author does not reject this premise. Right? They kind of, which is kind of fun, because that's the debate they were talking about, right? That was one of the big questions that the dude said in the previous text, that, right, does this loaded language evaluate it or not? That was one of the questions, but they kind of just assumes, oh yeah, that was one of my criticism, right? The assumption is that it does evaluate. And I'm not convinced. They haven't argued that it does, like, at all. And a statistic analysis cannot argue that from my point of view. Let's continue reading, see what Bianca says though. Within this broad field, there are entire areas of investigation that have been explored only relatively recently on theoretical grounds, let alone experimental ones. As a matter of fact, the domain of loaded language encompasses not only moral discourse, on which Pascale's post focuses, but also expressive speech, ranging from insults, jerk, bastards, interjections, shit, fuck, intensifiers, damn, fucking, to slurring terms, that is, derogatory words that target groups and individuals on the basis of their belonging to a certain category. Think of racial and homophobic epithets, for instance. Yeah, and I reject this. Language is not loaded. Language is arbitrary. The loadedness happens in context and in social situations, right? In some places, in some context, shit and fuck is not very loaded. In others, they are. Right? Right? You don't go to sermon in a regular church where the priest uses this kind of language. Right? That is not allowed. And it becomes super loaded in that context. While in this stream, for example, I don't mind using these words, shit and fuck, or fucking, or jerk, or bastards, right? All these language are just... yeah. They are not, like, they're not equally loaded in this context, right? And in some contexts, they are not loaded at all, right? Well, that's my point, right? Language is not loaded. Ideas and opinions are loaded, right? For example, I don't allow for these things in the channel, right? Actually, Twitch does not allow for these things. Racial and homophobic epithets, for instance, that is not allowed, and that is super loaded because of the opinions that people have and how the language has been used, right? It is the opinions and the acts that people do, right? They use the language to do bullying, right? Right? I have heard racial epithets that's been used in certain contexts that were not used for bullying and racism, for example. Right? You can talk about a fag and be talking about cigarettes, and that is not homophobic epithets, right? It's the same word, but it's not the same. You can talk about gay meaning happy, and it's not... right? It depends on the context, not the word. And I think both of these people do the same mistake. Many crucial questions arise around expressive discourse. What expressive speech is, how it works, how expressive content is encoded in language, what functions it fulfills with respect to the speaker and to the audience, in what relation it stands to morality, if any, when should it be censored, if ever. All right. What expressive speech is, how it works. Right. These questions I find very interesting, yeah. I reject this idea, though, that expressive content is encoded in the language. Right? Language is a tool, like, essentially, what is language? It is a tool where you have a thought and ideas in your mind, and you want to take those ideas and put them into someone else's head, right? It is just a tool for communication, right? You have something that you want said and understood by the other person. Content cannot be encoded because language is inherently arbitrary. Do we have an example of that? Damn it, I know an example in Swedish, but that doesn't make sense, so talking about it in English. No, like I said, gay, for example, meaning happy or homosexual, right? That word gay it's not, the meaning is not encoded, it's arbitrary. It completely depends on the context and how it's being used. Those three sounds, the g, e, right? Those phonemes and those letters have no inherent meaning, right? They are just sounds that we as people ascribe meaning. And that meaning we ascribe as individuals, right? And your understanding of that word, like your encodedness, right? Your semantic understanding of a word might differ from mine. Right? Misunderstandings do happen all the time. That is not a feature of language. That is just, well, it's just how we work, right? We think differently about things. This is interesting though. What function, like the other stuff is, right? Expressive speech, what is it? That is interesting because we do, right? These things can be used to express emotions and opinions, right? I don't disagree with that, and that is something interesting to study. Like, I would not call that metaethics though. I would call that linguistics and psychology, right? How do we express emotion? How does it work exactly? And then sociology studies, right, about society and norms and whatnot, what functions it fulfill with respect to the speaker and to the audience, right? Yeah, what happens? And what is the entire groups, right? What is in this context? What does these words means in this context? Right, and how it is being used exactly. In what relation it stands to morality, if any, when it should be censored, if ever. And here we go. That are moral questions. Yeah. And understanding how it works, I would concede, right? When you understand how it works and how it is being used, you can understand why someone wants to censor it. Right? We can argue our shoulds. Right? Right. When you use slurs against people, they feel bad. Right? And that is what morality and ethics is all about, right? How should you treat other people? What should you not do? Should it be censored in certain situations? Right? Should these curse words be censored for the priest holding his sermon? I would say yes. In that context, the priest should be censored, right? They should not use this language, depending on the church, of course, right? I've never been in a church where the priest could have said these things in a sermon, but I can also imagine that certain religions and certain priests and stuff like that, where this language would just be fine. Right? Context. Like, the audience matters a lot. Yeah. Right, in the very last few years, philosophers and linguists have started experimenting on expressive language. Interesting. Well, until recently, only psychologists and cognitive scientists have done so. Oh, right, we're using psychology and cognitive scientists and moving it into semantics, right? Semantics and with the linguists. That makes sense, yeah. Some crossover. Right. See, among others, Bowers and Plaidel Pierce, 2011, or Fasoli at et al. At 2015. This has been a pivotal turn in the study of expressives. Just as much as for the investigation of moral terms discussed by Pascale, so far scholars have solely relied on their own intuitions, assuming they are a reliable source of information. All right. I think this new type of study of expressive language is a good idea, but I think this is very unfair. Solely relied on their own intuitions. When you do qualitative work, right? When you do philosophical work in this regard, you are allowed to define a word however you see fit, right? Ja. Mobil?
Nej.
Har du skrivit något?
Spruta.
Spruta? Ja, tack för påminnelsen.
Jag följer med ner.
Följa med ner och ta sprutan. Om du vill så får du jättegärna göra det.
Ja.
Yes, ja, jag ser det. 35 var det, så jag ska bara avsluta här. All right, I got a reminder that I'm taking a shot. Flu shot. Yeah, definitely. Well, not a flu shot, sorry. Vaccine against corona. That's what I'm doing right now. So we'll continue this tomorrow. So far, this was more interesting. I thought that the response would not be super interesting, but so far it is. All right, but I am off. Have a good one. See you next time, and cheers.